A day like today in 2002, the government of Hugo Chavez, with a little over 3 years in power, confronted a brutal attack that finished with the institutionality. He confronted the first attack organized by opposition, both inside and outside. A coup that started one day before with an opposed mobilization from against the presidential palace with shooters. They blamed the executive of repression through forged and billed notes. By this time, President Hugo Chavez had been kidnapped, and civilians claimed his return for the continuity of the revolution. Meanwhile, Pedro Carmona Estanga self-proclaimed himself as president, and he violated the new constitution recently enacted, and the media attacked the truth with lies. Hugo Chavez left a note saying that he had not resigned, and people were outside. There started his victory, because people supported him. And now United States resists to enable Venezuela 17 years of a coup. This is a critical move. We will look at news, actors, and your opinion. Thank you very much. An agenda of commemoration of those facts of blood, violence, rupture of the Constitution, and illegitimacy in 2002 is also today in these days. Venezuela is holding 4 organizations commemoration of the Bolivarian Revolution with more than 70 organizations around the world. In his next presentation, President Chavez compared what his government and we are now confronting with here is people with dignity and awareness. And as we defeated the coup that your empire gave Commander Chavez, today the Venezuelan people will continue defeating the continuous coup and permanent conspiracy and your wish of a change of regime in Venezuela. In Venezuela, we have a constitution. The people command in Venezuela, and this will continue being so. I would like to add testimonies recorded by a correspondent in Caracas, Venezuela, on Wednesday, April 10th, including our journalist Leonel Catamar. This is the force of the nation. At this time, we are victims of permanent aggression that does not stop, because it has an essential goal, which is to end with democracy and the revolution in Venezuela. Chavez unleashed passion, freedom, history, future. But all the people went to look for Chavez, and there was no minute. There was no distance. Distance became short because it was our commander. There's lots of people who believe that they do not believe in invasion. They don't want their sovereignty to be violated, and they want peace and constitution. As we said before, we want to show that the coup 17 years ago against Commander Chavez never ended. And at this time, it continues against President Nicolás Maduro. We particularly say because of the methods, persistence, the attempts of asphyxiation, and how the U.S. government is at the front of these attacks. After Hugo Chavez died in March 2013, the empire has not saved on coups against President Nicolás Maduro. The attacks have failed in spite of their strength. On February 12th, Day of Youth in Venezuela, the opposition created an unstabilization agenda that lasted 3 months with protests on the streets that prevented citizens in general circulating normally. Students progressively included death terrorist modalities. Several guarimbas that were installed as camps, amounts of money and weapons were found. This was in Caracas and Táchira. The balance was more than 40 dead people and dozens of wounded people. The Operation Jericho or Blue Coup, the military responsible, it was a planned action attack against several state institutions in Caracas. Several weapons were robbed to the armed forces. Ledesma was one of the leaders, and for this he was arrested. Guarimbas Part 2, 2017, with a high level of violence, mortality, and Guarimbas, mercenaries came back with the protest on the streets, undercover with a peaceful mobilization. They started burning everything that seemed to be Chavist or expressed their disagreement. In an attempt of magnifying August 2018, during the anniversary of the Bolivarian Guard, they tried to murder the president and other high military officials with explosive materials that finally exploded were unsuccessful. Operation Libertad, January 2019, a new operation with the self-proclaim of Juan Guaidó in a plaza in Caracas took place without any election. The White House recognized him immediately and started a delegitimation of democracy in Venezuela. High U.S. spokesman assured that they think on all options in Venezuela, including military. They tried to perform extraordinary sessions of the UN Security Council and an alleged humanitarian aid through the border between Colombia and Brazil. Other examples are economic war of several steps, since planned, induced plans, and bribing food and gas with sanctions, restrictions, blocking bank accounts abroad that have prevented the executive to comply paying debts and other expenses in Venezuela. There were also attempts at coup during the administration of President Maduro. We will add the following news published in ABN, Venezuelan State Agency. Cocoon 2.0, conducted by Leopoldo López, organized a triple attack against Venezuela. The author explained that this is a criminal organization composed by several opponents, as those we see on these pictures. The terrorist group, Leopoldo López Gavilán, Juan Guaidó, self-proclaimed president, Freddy Gualdó, Carlos Vecchio, who is chief of international relations, Roberto Marrero, chief of terrorist cells, Juan Planchado, financial operator, Sergio Vergara, collaborator, and others appear like Wilfrido Jesus Torres Gomez and others. It says that who leads is Leopoldo López, involved and material author of the operation called La Salida, Guarimbas Part 1, that aimed to attack the electronic payment system, the goods of Cico, Venezuelan company, with NGOs facilitated by Colombia, and the creation of a media act protagonized by deserting soldiers who they plan to put other uniforms, take a picture, and collect declarations in order to create confusion and make them lose among the Bolivarian armed forces. Jorge Rodriguez said that the evidence was collected in a cell phone of Juan Guaido's assistant, Roberto Marrero. He also explained that it's not a communication problem in case of faults with electronic payments and others akin, but it's a matter of humanity and peace. I go now to Misión Verdad, this research and analysis group that includes this note called Venezuela and the Clash of Powers in the UN Security Council, April 11. This publication talks about how the events sessions were held on the case of Venezuela and another special meeting of the UN Security Council, also without the approval of Venezuela. In both cases, it applied sensationalist news and repeated texts by the United States, omissions and lies. In the UN, Venezuela defended himself through its ambassador, Daniel Moncada, who revealed several lies of Mike Pence and exposed once again that Venezuela is victim of a brutal war and financial blockade, an arm used to separate the social life. We have a recount with photographies and the positions of Russia and China. We will now go to Agencia Latinoamericana de Información with the following. Venezuela, U.S. neo-imperialism, written by Daniel Pastor, expert on human rights and migration, has several degrees. The author, Martín Pastor, says that there's a sketch revealed by Argentinian journalist Stella Caloni with a document of the Southcom signed by Kurt Tidd, the former commander-in-chief until November 2018, under the name Masterstroke, that details steps to unstabilize Venezuela and take it to chaos. The goal is to create critical crisis that contribute to impoverish the population and always blame the government of Venezuela. This is pointed out here. This document is also found in Voltaire Network, because it talks about what happened, also talks about what happened in Libya, other countries of the Middle East, Africa, and how they want to repeat it on Venezuelan territory. We will now connect with Caracas for other data of Venezuelan reality. We were issuing some testimonies you collected. How you're on the streets, what sensation and perceptions can you collect there? Greetings, Lucia. Greetings from Yaguno Bridge. Since 2 days ago, there's an anti-imperialist court established here. It's a space for debate, thought as a space of gathering of Venezuelan society to reflect and project the political and social future of Venezuela. They are talking about what the coup against since Hugo Chavez was. We had several fora here. Yesterday we had a meeting with intellectuals and politicians of Venezuela. Today the Minister of Education, Aristóbal Esturi, came and made a very interesting recount of the current Venezuelan process and linked it to something you mentioned before, which is this being a continued coup as of the attempt in 2002. And therefore, 17 years later, we see purification of these techniques and a continuous attempt of overthrowing the president of the revolution, Nicolás Maduro, as they did with Hugo Chavez. People are debating here and placing special attention on the internal situation of the country, but also what is happening in the world with the recent validation of Juan Guaidó before OAS or Mike Pence's declarations in the UN Security Council. This is also being discussed here among the attendants of these anti-imperialist court, and how international law and linking on the case of Julian Assange and how the international policy has what has happened in the last days. These elements are collected here. We have a musical group here. People are participating in this debate that concern all Venezuelans, but in peace. Remembering, awareness, and historic memory. Thank you, Lionel, for showing us how things are on the streets in Caracas, and especially in the Ayahuno Bridge. Why so many failed attempts? Why failed attempts? And it's good to ask if we believe that United States is confronting a crisis of legitimacy, solvency of this unsustainable and inefficient hegemony. Are they trying to solve it on Venezuelan territory? We leave this question to answer after this pause.
Turiamo, 13 de abril 2002 a las 14:45 horas. Al pueblo venezolano y a quien pueda interesar. Yo, Hugo Chavez Frías, venezolano, presidente de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, declaro que no he renunciado al poder legítimo que el pueblo me dio. Para siempre. Hugo Chavez Frías.
Comenzaron el mismo 11 de abril la
On April
persecución,
11, the persecution, murder,
los allanamientos, las amenazas
interferences,
por
and
televisión,
TV
prensa, radio,
threats
para tratar
on
de
the
frenar
press
al
to
pueblo.
try to stop the people.
Sin embargo,
Nevertheless,
se llevaron la sorpresa de
they
su
were
vida.
surprised.
Se desató con toda la fuerza contenida
All this contains
la gran rebelión
strength,
popular esperada
the great
durante
popular
tanto tiempo
rebellion
contra la burguesía,
long awaited for
contra el
against the
imperialismo.
bourgeoisie and against
Abril en
imperialism
Venezuela,
was
17 años
unleashed.
de golpe continuado. Esa es nuestra jugada crítica
7
de
years
hoy.
of continuous coup. This is our
Yéndonos
critical
al
move
medio
today.
argentino,
We
página
now go
12,
to
10 de
Argentina,
febrero de este año,
page página
publicado
12,
o publicó
February this
la
year,
fallida estrategia
that
de
published the
Estados Unidos en
failed
Venezuela,
strategy
de
of
la autoría
U.S. and Venezuela,
del
written by
escritor,
writer,
poeta, sociólogo,
poet,
analista argentino
sociologist
Marco
Marco
Teruggi.
Teruggi.
La
And we
normalidad
see
es un
this picture
privilegio,
is
y esto sí que
normality, a
comunica, porque
privilege.
claro, hace parte
And
de
of
la
course, this is
estrategia
part of the
que se
strategy
desarrolla en
that
Venezuela,
is being performed in
afectar la
Venezuela
cotidianidad
to
y hacer
affect the
sentir
daily
al
life
común
and make
que
people
esa
feel
normalidad,
that
cuando se tiene,
this
es una cosa
normality
extraordinaria
is
y de
special and
cuando no
privileged,
debería ser,
when
lo sabemos.
this
Como
should
se ha
not be
prometido
so, as we
desde la
know.
derecha,
As
inmediatez, y ello no se ha dado, hay crisis de
the
expectativas,
left
considera el
promised, there
autor
is
de
a
esta nota,
crisis
Marco
of
Teruggi,
expectation,
cree al
says the
mismo tiempo que ha
author.
habido un
He
error de
also
cálculo inicial
believes
de
there
parte de
was
Estados Unidos
an
y
initial
de sus operadores.
miscalculation by
El
the United
derrocamiento de
States.
Maduro no
The
parece
defeat of
posible,
Maduro
así lo
seems
textual,
not being possible in the relation of forces in the country. Chavism is more than a government and is in the conditions of resistance. If President Guaidó would lose and be defeated, the problem is that this new coup attempt was tucked in a non-return point, and this is related with the crisis of expectations, a facade of a parallel government created by Israel, UK, Canada, and Latin American right-wing governments. Now we ask ourselves, communication void, what role did the private media play in Venezuela in 2002, and what are they doing today? The same? One of the main tools used by the media 17 years ago and today are the fake news. At that time, falsely accused the supporters of the Bolivarian governments of having shot since the inaugural bridge, and that the shooters on the buildings, there were official declarations of the government. April 11, private media lied, saying that Chavez had resigned and the vice president had been overthrown. On April 12, the media said that there were mobilizations that Chavez had been kidnapped and taken to Orchilla Island. Even Otto Neustadt said that there were militaries ready for massacre, and this was confirmed by his wife, a journalist of Neurovision. Today, the media use the same methodology to disorganize the government of Nicolás Maduro, and have also said that Maduro uses chemical weapons to repress the demonstrators. Leopoldo López allegedly entered a hospital. They say that the Bolivarian government oppresses its people. I add the ideas of our analysts prepared for this segment from Spain, Elizabeth Alves, university professor. Thank you for being with us. Do you agree with us in the fact that 17 years ago the coup against Chavez has never ended and now has other formats and variants? Yes, I do. The coup has been a strategy used by the United States always to try to keep governments completely favorable to its interests, and it has done it in several ways. Today, that is not one more event, but is a historic, continuous process that makes us say that the past is being reflected in our present, and we can call it a policy that compels us to subject Latin American peoples. So it's also a political horizon that we can analyze as follows. The imperialist attack, and together with the oligarchies, was also reflected in a way of defending of the people's defending its revolution. And it's a shame that today the oligarchies are disintegrated Latin American Caribbean unit with this new neoliberal wave with serious consequences for its people. This is why they reaffirm as representatives of these elites subordinated to the United States imperial supremacy. We are reviving strategies of a continuous strategy at times of decadence of the imperialism that Chavez clearly saw in his time. We have organized to resist and to confront that threat. I would like to take advantage of your phrases, the decadence of imperialism, to ask if U.S. hegemony is in crisis, and if so, is it pretending to resolve it on Venezuelan territory? Well, first, the dispute for Venezuela is not a problem of democracy or defense of human rights, if they pray, but it's a problem that the dispute is global. As the owners of the world, they think that they can control all the world. But this is not true, because internationally they are not the only one, in spite of the fact that they are still the empire. This is very dangerous, because we know what they are able of doing. In the Venezuelan case, why is this so important? It's not enough to know the resources Venezuela has. Everybody knows who has interest in Venezuela, but its geopolitical and geostrategic location. We are like the center of the international policy. This is a new phase of aggression against the peripheral countries. Venezuela becomes the beginning of a phase where they are trying to recover markets at the price, at whatever price. And Venezuela is not the only one. What happens is it's most visible because it has struggled more for its sovereignty. But peoples all around the world are struggling for their sovereignty and no longer believe in U.S. legitimacy. So I do believe that they are turning Venezuela in the center of imperialism at this time. You said that it's not a problem of democracy or human rights. These concepts are used intentionally together with liberty, failed state, humanitarian crisis, humanitarian aid, etc. They call sessions in OAS, United Nations, each time they want. And even if they don't achieve anything, in these spaces, we always see double standards. I ask you, are these institutions becoming less legitimate? Yes, because everybody knows that OAS was controlled by the United States. But one thing is to do it undercover and to do it directly, as they are doing now. Because in Latin America, we've always had an experience that, as Che said, it's the Ministry of Colonies. But after we defeated ALCA and demonstrate that the Monroe Doctrine was in decadence, it takes a new strength, and we see it in Haiti, Paraguay, and many countries in Latin America, and that it will come again to attack ECLAC. They have attacked ALBA, CP in every way, and now they left Abasur as an alternative to UNASUR. Definitely, Latin American oligarchies are completely subjected to U.S. interests, but it's not only OAS, United Nations as well. The United States wants to turn the United Nations into nothing because they do not recognize the International Criminal Court, nor and even the Security Council is not achieving what they thought they would.
Si ni siquiera hoy el Fondo Monetario
Internacional, the IMF or the World Bank, we will reach an agreement. They say that they must help Venezuela, but they can't define what government, if the legitimate of Nicolás Maduro or the self-proclaimed that is dying of Guaidó. You're talking about a global policy. I ask you, while there is still such a strong defense of Russia and China, will they achieve their goal in Venezuela? Yes, I think that what you are saying is very important, because the IMF and the World Bank know very well how the value has decayed, because everything that comes now regarding the fall of the dollar is imminent. Venezuela has nothing to do, but Venezuela becomes an essential country to leave the dollar market, because Venezuela promises to overcome their crisis if that international window is open for Venezuela. So obviously the IMF knows that the dollar is not the only currency. Markets have no nation, and they not only have to defend U.S. interests. Things are becoming very difficult for the United States, and it's not only a matter of attacking only Venezuela, it is also doing it with countries of the center that had some sovereignty. Those who live in Europe know that that is over. We are at a time of growth of poverty in many European countries in the United States. These international financial organizations are aware of this, and the financial aid of China is spectacular regarding the weakness of the United States. It continues to be a war power, and it wants to recover its world hegemony even through war. I advance one of the questions I had prepared for the next block to introduce this next event. Would the United States be able to confront a defeat in Venezuela? What would that mean for the United States? I think that this is a very difficult question. I know that a defeat would be very strong for the United States, but we must also see the internal dispute, political dispute in the United States, where the country is being destroyed, not only for the foreign policy against Venezuela or the Middle East, but its internal economy. There are huge internal contradictions that make this crazy policy the United States is following must be stopped by themselves, because they are destroying themselves. So I trust that some thinking minds, thinking on their own nation, United States, stop this crazy war mind, and know that markets are not won by destroying people, such as Venezuela and others that have the legitimate right to defend its autonomy and sovereignty. Thank you, Professor Elizabeth.
Hasta luego. Bueno, allí teníamos a la profesora Elizabeth Alves desde España.
This was Professor Elizabeth Alves from Spain. When we come back, we want to talk about the reasons for such a conspiracy. And there's also a political subject called to change these hegemonic structures that are active in Venezuela. And perhaps this explains so much resistance. And once again, the question is the USA willing to assume a new geopolitical defeat? Let's advance to this with our next guest. A small pause and we'll be back.
De regreso a la jugada crítica. Abril en Venezuela, 17 años de golpe continuado.
April in Venezuela, 17 years of coup. And we ask, what are the reasons and the common denominator of these conspiracies against Venezuela? Since the Bolivarian government of Hugo Chavez came to power to this date, the United States has had one goal. On one hand, to defeat a political project that refuses to be a soldier of the White House, that confronted the doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, and on the other hand, to take over its natural resources. John Bolton himself has said that it would make a difference for U.S. corporations to participate in the oil of Venezuela. Oil in Venezuela is 18% of the world reserves. The United States consumes 19% of the world crude. Another moment is the distance between U.S. and Venezuela, which is key for the final price. 5,500 kilometers from Venezuela as compared to Saudi Arabia. These reasons explain that Venezuela is a goal for them, but their aggressive policies do not allow defeating the Bolivarian resolution. Perhaps one of the reasons for Chavez that Venezuela continues to transform the life of the people. Chavez is recognized in the history of the liberators and revolution as Chavez as River is kept still in the country that progresses in the struggle for the people. We have now Gustavo Borges, Director of Misión Verdad, also analyst, expert in communication general. Welcome, Gustavo. To continue with our topic, I would like to ask you, things are moving constantly. Why this resistance capacity? What are the variables or the barriers that play as a containment wall? Venezuela is not anything for the intelligence or military services of the United States. Since Commander Chavez arrived to the presidency, this has always been a problem for them. In the operation, we've seen very poor calculation regarding the change of administration in Venezuela, because this administration is not exactly characterized by organization, not even internal, worse foreign policy. So, in my opinion, I think they are improvising in Venezuela beyond their aggression lines from since Bill Clinton to this day. There are variables they don't consider. They have mediocre and ignorant levels regarding their own political situation, and they lack local informers on the country. And of course, there is the continuous and repeated underestimation of the Chavez program that they've tried to criminalize and take it to the corner. And even Emilio Borges said in an interview that it was a country in quarantine that could infect the region. So the treatment inside their own country and Venezuela is very simple and light, weak, and they don't have precise information. And I repeat, they don't consider the people, the political institution created in 20 years, the ethical, spiritual, almost religious, I would say, force that the Venezuelan people has undergone. Since 1999, Chavez, let's remember, arrived to power with the support of some sectors of national elite. They pretended somehow to shape, and they thought that Chavez was shapeable and adjustable to their interests and those of the United States. When they found out after the enactment of the first laws that led to the 2002 coup, they knew that Chavez had his own project, and since then came the coups and the aggression against Venezuela. Since 2002, Chavez tried to rearrange Venezuelan policy versus Washington, and this marked the U.S. aggression. And it always took place in critical points of world governance. In 2002, was consistent with U.S. attempt to rearrange the world when neoconservative of this radical group came to power with Bush Jr. He said that the first shot of the Iraq war was made in, because once they failed here in Venezuela, they intensified their force in Iraq, and they imposed terror in order to control at least one oil territory. 17 years later, the critical point is that they haven't been able to control not even Middle East. They were unable to rearrange the region. The rise of powers ended with a sovereign government, like the case of Syria, and some organizations and their pseudo allies are turning around precisely because of this harsh policy in countries where there have many resources. Now, the results they announced have not occurred, and this after an article we read of Marco Teruggi, and the Bolivarian force was not broken as they wished. Is this because this is the strategy, or was this miscalculation and improvisation, underestimation? Yes, they don't consider, for example, the deep doctrinary, spiritual, and ethical work made inside the National Armed Forces. Hugo Chavez represented a breaking point for the history, even from the failure of Bolivarianism. After the Bolivar's failure because of betrayals and the imposition of an oil model, Venezuela was imposed with a national model where national concept should be exterminated. This is why, as of Juan Vicente Gomez started this, and why we have to go to history, because we can see that Chavez started with a national view, historic view, and that the present can only establish a system by knowing our history, because statistically we are in disadvantage versus USA's military apparatus, but the level of participation of the people, the enthusiasm for defending the country versus a foreign nation is not common, and Venezuela has it perhaps in its first line of defense. This Bolivarian doctrine that Hugo Chavez imposed in Venezuela since 2000 to the state, because this represents a union that is not only unbreakable but is strategic. We cannot understand our forces without the militia, and the militia without popular organizations like the Bolivarian councils, like Coup. We are looking at this at present. If we see that they permanently criminalize the armed forces, we see U.S. spokesmen almost daily in the last months talking directly to the Venezuelan military chiefs, threatening them and offering them things. On the other hand, this tells us that they ignore the leadership that has been built from the troop to the highest commander. Now, of course, this touches the opponent sector and the grassroots militants. What consequences could this have, that the opponents do not receive the results of what their leaders promised? Yes, this has been analyzed even by psychologists, experts in semiotics, semantics, and behaviors, because there's a quite irresponsible management of especially local leaders. Chavism movement, anti-Chavism are permanently injecting people with illusions that do not take place. They don't even reach successful negotiation processes. All negotiations have taken place after their defeats. In 2017, after the Constituent Assembly, we can be in front of a massive psychological crisis of the middle class in Venezuela, because they are not being manipulated by just any political entity. They are being manipulated for the most powerful empire in humanity, as the United States, with all its military and psychological propaganda. So I think that we are having a public health crisis, because a new failure will come, and perhaps this would be the largest expectation existing. They told them that Chavism is over, and we know what they told them. After reviewing speeches of the high commands of the U.S. Establishment, we had the impression that there have been some variation in the fact that we are using all options, including military in Venezuela. Do you think that military intervention is still an option? I think it is, because the United States has a background of military invasion, especially in Latin America. But we must not discard that this is a strategy to conceal or soften the impact of sanctions and blockade that are the harshest measures that is causing most damage. We mustn't discard this as a rhetoric smoke curtain, and that they have a brutal strategy that inside the use they call it the nuclear option, because of the damage they create among the population. But a blockade, we're not at any time. A blockade is not the same in 1960 like now. There are ways of running around it. Is the United States willing to accept a political defeat in Venezuela? I don't think so, but even if it weren't, there's a political reality. The world is no longer what it was. The United States is no longer what it was. It has an internal political existential crisis. The future of that country, we can see this with Donald Trump's political project and the neoconservative project, even if they could be opposition or not. And I say this because the end of hegemony of U.S. world plan is inevitable. All the think tanks or Western study centers agree with this. This is why we say that Europe is detaching from the U.S. policy, because the model that the United States proposes is unsustainable, not only in the financial and economic arena, but also the military arena. It has been exceeded by Russia, which has a much smaller economy. It has been exceeded as military power and production power by China. There's no way of stopping the advance, because it's capital moving. It's the huge corporations that left the United States towards China or the Southeast Asia. These are the great think tanks of military technologies in Russia, for example, that have a nationalistic concept, not as the United States, that has derived in a corrupt class that only is interested in selling and threatening countries to purchase weapons that are even obsolete. You think that this year will be marked by this? Yes, this is a long-term war. We don't pretend that it be resolved immediately. I'm not only talking about Venezuela. I'm talking about the world, the Western concept of establishing and relating in the world. We cannot pretend this to be solved in 1-2 years. In fact, the arrival of Chavez in 1999 and even the 2002 coup takes place in critical times of world geopolitics. The United States thought that history had closed, as one of its greatest thinkers wrote after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1899. The United States thought that there was no more history after that. Not only the United States, but elites all over. They thought that, and Hugo Chavez came to change. And this is why they hate Venezuela, because it was a drastic change on how a region is conceived and how it confronts a power that was absolute. But because without the Soviet Union making the counterweight, and Venezuela showed since 2000, even until now, we showed that we could have our own project and think from the inside and talk to the United States at the same level with the project that was thought from here. UNASUR, ECLAC, ALBA, Petrocaribe are entities of intelligent power that the United States did not expect. It did not expect to negotiate but establish hard lines and a position like that's why I say it's dynamic. Look, what is true is that confrontation will continue because structural changes don't happen overnight. It passes through a long and painful transition process, and Venezuela is a protagonist in this process. And we are witness and protagonist of that process. Thank you, Gustavo. Let's go to our conclusions, some kind of summary, what our guests have told us. First, what Gustavo said in the last part, there's a long-term battle. Venezuela continues to be the epicenter, and this is therefore a continuous aggression against this country. Elizabeth Alves also talked there's a miscalculation of the empire because Trump has improvised. There have been variables he had not considered, even if there's strong aggression. They have underestimated Chavism as a movement, a philosophy, and way of life. And because Hugo Chavez was a breaking point in the history of Venezuela and Latin America, because he came back to the roots of our own history. And the aggression against Venezuela takes place in critical moments in world politics. The impossibility of controlling the Middle East, and also an existential and ethic crisis of the empire. And finally, they don't care about democracy, human rights, or as they have claimed, but it's a global policy issue and a confrontation with other powers, because the United States is no longer alone. With these ideas, we end our critical move. We are always analyzing Venezuela. Have a good weekend.